Glass of wine? No?
Yeah, no,
You say
later.
no?
Lucid meal.
Okay.
Okay. Hello and Privyet, tubers and connoisseurs of fine imperial and Soviet Russian militaria. Welcome to collectrussia.com. And today we have some scarce pieces from the Cold War. Igor.
Hi, everybody. John, today we'll be discussing an interesting and poorly understood medal that many collectors know about. Not many have it in their collections. And also, it's the one medal that's very frequently faked. It has been faked for years because it's one of the most scarce medals of the post-war Soviet period. It's also very interesting because it has to do with the military and KGB, and it could be awarded to a very selected group of people. Some of them were security officers, and interestingly, many of the recipients were not Soviets. So it's one of the medals that they frequently gave to foreigners, to a very special group of foreigners. And I'm talking about people who were in a very major role participating in joint military exercises of Warsaw Pact. The medal came up in 1979, in pretty early part of the year, in May, I believe, of 1979. And if you remember what happened in 1979, was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was about to happen.
Right.
It was late 1979. So it almost seems like they knew that something big was coming up, or whatever might be the reason, they felt necessary to establish that medal there and then. And along that same medal that Soviets had, there were others issued by governments of various Warsaw Pact countries. So Soviet Union wasn't the only one who had a medal of this nature. There were medals of Czechoslovakia, of Cuba, that were awarded along the same lines, of Bulgaria, of Mongolia even. There were also badges for participating in those exercises. Some of them are pretty ornate and interesting, and I'll show you a couple of those just as a sample. But the medal was much more important. The medal was issued very sparingly. And immediately after they instituted it, there was a rush of issues to people who already have earned it in one capacity or the other. So in the initial couple of years, 2,000 medals were issued. But then the pace of issuing them slowed down. And over the entire history of the Soviet Union, all through 1991, or whenever they stopped giving out the medal, maybe a year or two even later, but in that entire period, when it existed, there were only fewer than 20,000 awarded. And it may seem like a large number, but you have to put it into a perspective. Soviet Union was a huge country. Russia still is. Tens of thousands of millions of inhabitants. At the glory day of the Soviet Union, we were talking almost 300 million people. Huge military that played a huge role in the country, was very prominent in terms of numbers, not just military power. Very large state security arm, very large interior ministry branch of troops. And therefore, you would expect that there would be more of them given out. But no, it was, again, awarded very, very sparingly. And 20,000 is not a large number by any means. You can compare it with, say, World War II medal for the defense of Odessa. There were more of those, actually, by far, than, at least initially, than of the combat cooperation medal. Arguably, few could have been left in the Soviet inventory after the Soviet Union broke apart. But even with that in mind, there must have been no more than maybe 25,000 in total, or somewhere around that number. And from the experience, this all makes sense because the medal is quite scarce. There were many fakes on the market since I remember myself in this business and hobby. Maybe going back in 1990s, there were already fakes of it, simply because it was always fairly pricey, and it was very sought after because of its importance as a top Cold War decoration, you could say. Again, ordinary people, just conscripts, would never receive such a medal. This was only for officers and typically for high-end officers, and only to those who had direct relationship with the militaries of the Warsaw Pact. Those were the guys who were keeping the Warsaw Pact together. In many cases, serious decision makers, some politicians of various countries, and top military officers, staff officers that conducted those joint military exercises of the Warsaw Pact. So interesting historically, there are no variations of it to speak of, which is very fortunate for collectors. And I will demonstrate what specific signs one must look for to ensure that the medal is real. We will also talk about its size, which is of course less important because remember, fakers know their business,
Right.
and you cannot go by size or weight alone. However, this is your first line of defense as always. So we will discuss the sizes, the weight, and I will show you a couple of real rarities from the Cold War that are directly related to our topic today. And I think our viewers will be thrilled in many cases, many of them at least,
Absolutely.
to see those things, because this is, I guarantee you, this is not something that you see every day, and you may be surprised. Wow.
Okay.
So now that I piqued your interest,
You sure did.
Let's get to the business of actually discussing
All right.
the details.
Let's see what we got here.
And here's what I'm talking about, the specific example of a nicely preserved medal for strengthening combat cooperation. This is actually what's inscribed here for strengthening combat cooperation, USSR. You see the crossed swords, the Soviet-style red star, of course, shield, the Varangian shield, Varangian-style shield that was often used in various parts of insignia of the Soviet military, chevrons, for example, and the multicolored ribbon that's supposed to represent fraternship of several countries that comprised Warsaw Pact. Medal was primarily issued to officers of the four groups of Soviet troops: the Central Group, the group in Germany, all stationed in Eastern and Central Europe, of course, the Northern Group, which was Poland, and Southern Group, centered around Hungary. All of them, of course, were a very important instrument of Soviet control over the Warsaw Pact. And as you know, of course, it was a very serious threat to anybody, to any country who wouldn't toe the line. We know what happened, for example, the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. And there was every indication that it could happen again in the early 80s, late 70s in Poland, when there was a real resistance brewing against the communist rule. And you remember Lech Walesa and his independence, his trade union movement.
Yes. The guy with the big mustache.
Yeah, exactly. And they were a serious threat. And Soviet leadership was none too impressed, initially at least, with how Polish authorities reacted. And there was a very real threat of Warsaw Pact invasion of Poland at that time. So this medal is more politically than meets the eye. But I digress a little bit. So let's get back to the discussion of how a medal looks. You see this surface, which looks like gilt. It's actually a lacquer. The medal is made of brass, so-called hot enamel, meaning hot-baked, high-quality enamel. And on the back, you see this very peculiar graining, which is a characteristic feature of all original medals for strengthening combat cooperation. If you don't see this particular pattern on any of the medals, it's most likely. It doesn't wear out, or at least it doesn't wear out easily. It may have patina, it may in some cases have heavy oxidation, blemishes, but you will always see this very specific type of graining. If it's too exaggerated, and I often see it on fakes, if it's too grainy, if the grains are big, then it's definitely a fake. There's no question about it. The eyelet is always in this shape. It's struck as one piece as the rest of the medallion.
One piece.
It's all one piece construction.
Oh, wow. It's not a separate
No. Soviet post-war medals, including campaign medals of World War II that were issued starting from maybe 2 years, 3 years after the war, after the end of the war, they are one-piece construction. And especially the late ones from the 60s and later, so-called veterans or Bankomat version of World War II campaign medals, and all the rest of them. Every Soviet medal was made in this exact way, with this type of eyelet, rounded, and it looks pretty much the same on the other side, and the surface of the medal is lacquered. This is what looks like a gilt. It's not really gilting. It's
lacquering. Wow. Okay.
Now, to talk about other Cold War, similar Cold War words of other countries, I just show a sampling of them here. It's complete. It's not, of course, any kind of complete collection, and that can be a subject of separate discussion, of course, and even an area of collecting. There are people who collect badges of various communist countries for cooperation between those countries, between their militaries. But just as an example, there is a medal in second class for strengthening fraternity of arms, the way they call it, but it's essentially the same thing, issued in May 1970. So you can see that they existed even before the Soviet. The Soviets came up with their own. Then there are badges of various for participation in various exercises of Warsaw Pact. For example, don't laugh, but it's the exercise shit, which in Russian means shield, not what you would think.
Oh, interesting.
It's 1972, and you see various flags of all the participant countries.
Is it pronounced shit?
It's pronounced shit. It's not pronounced.
Okay.
And it's a very fine difference, but it's
interesting.
It's pronounced
in Russian. Yeah, okay.
Shit.
Shit means shield.
Means shield.
Gotcha.
Not something else.
Okay.
1972. That was a massive exercise, and many of the participating officers, possibly all the commissioned officers, received the badge. This one is for the 25th anniversary. This one was given much more selectively. It's interesting that it says here in the center, Union of Peace and Socialism. I don't know about peace, definitely, of socialism, that's for sure. And again, participating flags of the participating countries, 25th anniversary of Warsaw Pact. This sort of thing would be given to staff officer, to somebody who was near the top at least, and had some kind of decision-making role possibly, or participate very closely in whatever event was there, a conference for 25th, celebrating the 25th anniversary. Of course, all the dignitaries, all the top echelon of the military would receive it too. This is one of the last awards that were issued to commemorate Warsaw Pact. This was the tail end of it. Look at the date, 1991. Very few of this, if any, were issued. They produced the medal to give essentially to NCOs, possibly to officers for sure, that were leaving the Eastern Europe at that point. By then, the Soviet Union was about to collapse. Warsaw Pact was no more, and Soviet troops were leaving the previously controlled territories of Central and Eastern Europe. So it's one of the last awards of the Warsaw Pact. But as I said, there are many more of various quality, and some of them more scarce than others. One in particular that I had, unfortunately I don't have it now, but I think it's pretty unusual, was the last conference of Warsaw Pact, 1990. It was the 21st conference of the participating countries. Again, for sure given to somebody who was at that conference, not to everybody who was in the vicinity. A very selective kind of thing. And it looked very plain compared to nicely made earlier brass badges of the Warsaw Pact. You could say that you could tell that the country is in trouble when the decorations kind of lose their luster. They can tell you a story in and of their own.
Yes.
You can see how things are developing, the kind of writing on the wall. Medals become, cheaply made.
Okay.
So that was one of those cases. But to return to our main discussion, which is the combat cooperation medal, let's get to those die flows, which fortunately for collectors, this medal has a plenty. And that's how you defend yourself from getting a fake. I already mentioned the graining. That's the easy part, and that's relatively easy to, if not replicate exactly, at least come close. But there are more important parts that are not so easy to fake at all. In fact, I think they're impossible in their entirety to be faked. When you look very closely, this medal will turn out to have tremendous number of flaws. And the original designer of this medal, the artist, the person who was also responsible for designing many other late Soviet awards, like, for example, Order of Friendship of Nations. His name was Alexander Zhuk. He had enormous kind of maneuverability and very, very accepted, generally accepted designer for this sort of things, for the medals especially, and badges. And he was reportedly livid when the medal actually went into production, because the prototype that he designed was supposed to be much more streamlined and better made than what the Soviet Mint at that late stage in the game started to turn out. So he was very unhappy about how it came out. And you will notice those flaws, especially in the shield. If you look at these letters here, the first word, which is Za, which looks like 3A, it's actually the first character is Russian character Z, and the second one is A, so it's Za, meaning 4. You will notice a lot of imperfections that are in the top part of the shield right next to these letters. You will notice, for example, the wrinkles. You will see horizontal lines that go straight from the dots, the sort of nails of the shield, to the left and to the right, towards the center. You will also notice this uneven area next to the A, to the right of A, which is very, very prominent. You have to take a look. You have to be careful, but you will definitely know what I'm talking about if you take an enlarged picture, and we'll show enlarged pictures here on our channel, on our episode, just for you to see what exactly I have in mind. There is also this, what looks like an icicle almost, that's or a drop coming out from the top of the Z. This what looks like a 3, the top portion of it, there is something kind of dripping from the top of this character. So very many imperfections. Take a look at the image that we have here, and you will notice a huge difference when somebody tries to offer you a fake.
Yes.
All the original medals, there's one very interesting exception, which I'll mention at the end, have this feature. What you are likely to see, to be sure you have an original piece offered to you, make sure you pay attention to those details. There are also many peculiarities, I should say, in the construction of the reef and some imperfections there. I won't go into too many details, but again, when you have a picture of the original in front of you, you won't make a mistake.
Right.
There are just too many things to imitate. And I'm talking about tiny details and flaws of the die that are all over the metal. Enamel, you will notice that enamel is sort of chunky. It doesn't fit very perfectly. It has like bulbous appearance to it. That's a sign of an original metal. I've seen flatter and in some ways maybe better quality enamel on more recent fakes.
Wow.
Than what you see here. But this is exactly how it's supposed to be on the original. Lots of luster, but you can also see that it's not entirely even. It's kind of bulbous on the edges.
Yes.
All right, with that discussed, we must touch very briefly on the size and weight. Again, it's no guarantee of anything. Just as I mentioned many times before, fakes may have a very precise size, matching the original, and weight too. But at the very least, if you pay attention to weight and size, you will be spared the necessity to go much farther if it's an obvious fake. So if it's very far off, then you don't need to waste your time and look anymore. And the size and weights that I recorded, These are medals that we had in recent past. Width is much more meaningful than height because height may differ depending on the strike much more, but width is pretty consistent. It's 31.8, 32.1, 32.0, 32.1. You can see that all of them are not more, less than 31.8. That's an outlier actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not seen any, at least in recent years, with a width more than 32.1 millimeters. So that's your range. Comfortable range, I would say, is very close to 32.0.
Okay.
Maybe 1 to 2 decimal points one way or the other. As far as the weight, less consistent, of course, but it will be in approximately 15 to 17 gram range. 15 on the low end of the scale, 16.9 is the highest that I recorded recently, but that's your approximate range. And now, when we have this done and discussed, I want to show something that you literally won't see every day. And that is the prototype.
Wow, the prototype.
This is the prototype that was actually presented to the designer, to Alexander Zhuk, before the medal went into serial production.
I see.
Reportedly, just a few of these were made. And generally, I'll admit to you, first time that I saw this medal, when I acquired it in a collection, I didn't pay any kind of premium or it really didn't factor in the price of all the things, or the more important things, more expensive things that were in that collection. My initial reaction to it was that it was a fake. Because it just didn't match precisely all those characteristics of the original medal that I just mentioned. Well, guess what? I started looking, and I noticed some peculiar things. And we're talking something like 20 years ago, or maybe in that neighborhood.
Yes.
At that time, very precise fakes, die struck with high quality enamel, and all the markings of quality production simply did not exist.
Wow.
They were typically crudely made, or at least custom made, if not crudely. They were not the mint quality. Today, you cannot say so. Today, there are fakes of spectacular quality, unfortunately. But this only became possible with recent days, with modern days technology. It was not feasible at all 20 years ago. And this is how old they knew that medal already was at that point.
Yeah.
Right? It was 20 years ago. So I looked at it and I just couldn't believe my eyes. And I thought, no, it's impossible. They finally started producing fakes just like this. I shared photos with a couple of collectors that I know, in Russia specifically. And one of them showed it to somebody else. And lo and behold, the answer came back that this is one of the prototypes.
That's incredible.
The same exact medal was in Zhuk's private collection that was eventually sold years, some time after his death, and it was exact match to this piece. Wow. So how many of these do exist? We don't know, but you can tell the quality is better. It has very nice grain to the top portion of the shield, but it doesn't have any of these die flows. It doesn't have any of this random lines that you see on serially produced metal. There are some other differences too. For example, the depiction of the swords is much more precise than on the serial.
Oh yeah,
the reef is slightly different. Again, it's a little bit more precise. Doesn't have the flows that you see on a typical medal, and so forth and so on. But when you look at the back, it's pretty much the same. It also has this. There's just more patina on it, but the graining is the same. It doesn't have this exaggerated graining. So yes, this is an original prototype and one of who knows how many exist in the world today. Maybe 2, maybe 3, or maybe 5, but not much more than that.
Not many at all.
I can guarantee you that.
Yes.
So this is something that you just don't see.
That's
but for
a rarity.
practical purposes, you want to pay attention to this medal. Look, by the way, I almost forgot to mention how the ribbon is wrapped. This is the correct way of wrapping it. On most Soviet medals, it's much simpler. It looks like this. Again, this is a prototype, so it's neither how the ribbon looks. but on a standard issue suspension with the ribbon, the way it came out of the mint, the ribbon was wrapped this way. Not that ribbon is all that important, but you may want to know.
Yes.
And lastly, about the documents.
Okay.
The documents for the medal came in two different formats. They all look the same on the outside, but it is the inside that sort of tells you the additional part of the story. There is a stamp, and some of the medals say that it's issued on behalf of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet. This was done on behalf of the Presidium in cases when a medal was awarded by some ministry. And the main ministries that awarded it, obviously, were Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Interior, MPD, and also KGB. And in all those cases, it would say on behalf of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, not just by the Presidium.
Yes.
In some cases, it would say by the Presidium or by the order of the Presidium of Supreme Soviet. So the text may differ here, the stamp may differ depending on what authority issued it. But here's your incredible part. Look at the name of the recipient. Andropov.
No, wait a minute.
Andropov, does it sound?
Yeah, Andropov, the leader.
Died of a cold. Not the dealer, the leader himself.
Not himself.
This is his son. And his son, interestingly, of course, he was in some way or another part of KGB.
Yeah.
He went to Foreign Service Academy. And actually taught there for a while later. Rather, Institute. He attended Institute of International Relations, which was, on one hand, it was the school for Soviet elite. The Kremlin leaders would put their children there so they could get a cushion job somewhere in a foreign country. And,
incredible.
Make a lot of money without really doing much. But on the other hand, people who went to any, especially what they call capitalist country, any free world country, was expected in one way or another to work for KGB.
I see.
And it's interesting that in his case, and Andropov's son's case, they wouldn't let him go to where he really wanted to go. His ambition was to work somewhere in Great Britain or France or some other place like that. He was never allowed until very late in the game, at least while his father was chief of KGB and then eventually became Soviet premier. He was not allowed to go to any capitalist so-called country. And that was, of course, very detrimental to his career. Eventually, he was appointed an ambassador to Greece. And this document came out, was issued to him at the time when he actually held that position. Ambassador to Greece. Ambassador to Greece. And we can only guess as to what he had to do with combat cooperation. There is some story there that may remain under wraps for who knows how long, and maybe for another 100 years. But there was some kind of activity that he participated as an ambassador, as a diplomat, which had to do with foreign militaries and especially cooperation with foreign militaries. So obviously there was something else to his role than we know. The document is signed by General of the Army Shkadov, which is also interesting. He was chief of personnel of the Soviet Armed Forces, so very high-end position. And the date is May 1985. So again, something you don't see every day. These documents in general are much more scarce than medals. And we see documents like this awarded to foreigners and Soviets alike. And usually if it's a foreign military officer or state security officer, they would have to be pretty high-end to receive this medal. In case in point, I will show you one such medal issued by KGB that's featured in Ralph Picard's book. And by the way, I will never tire of recommending it. This is volume 2 of his book on Stasi decoration. And you can see right on the cover that some of the decorations awarded to Stasi, to East German secret police, were Soviet.
There we go.
Of nations here, Major Warner, honored employee of state security,
Wow.
and of course Combat Cooperation Medal. Now,
There you go.
he just had to cover the name of the recipient in this case, but you can see that the stamp is of Soviet Committee for State Security.
Yes.
And guess who signed it in 1981?
Okay, who do we got here?
Andropov. Only it's
Okay.
not this Andropov, it's his dad.
Yes.
So you have an Andropov signature.
There
It's
we
quite
have
unusual.
father and son.
And it says Chairman of State Security of the USSR.
Yes.
By that time, under his tenure, KGB achieved enormous power that it did not have before, and became a sort of separate ministry. Up until the 80s, it was under the auspices of the Supreme Soviet. So it was a committee at the Supreme Soviet. So it was subordinate to the Supreme Soviet. Under Andropov, in late years of his tenure, it became a massive, almost all-powerful body that was responsible to almost nobody other than maybe members of the Politburo, the top 4, 5, 6 people in the Soviet leadership.
Right.
But not even answerable directly to Supreme Soviet. And the date is 11 March 1981, so we're talking just 4 years before this document was issued to his son.
That's amazing.
Isn't this a nice connection?
Yeah.
This, by the way, would be a very uncommon document if you
Yeah.
had Andropov's, and in this case, it's a facsimile signature. But anything this facsimile signature of Andropov, and specifically this document issued by KGB, would be very uncommon. Most of them were issued by them.
Oh, I see. Wow, that's
So
a scarce piece in
even
itself.
this one issued to Andropov, to son of Andropov, you would think it would be Foreign Service or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's actually Ministry, it says here, by the Deputy Minister of Defense of the USSR in charge of personnel.
Wow.
So an unusual stamp, somewhat, and still very interesting, but not a KGB issue, and not some other, as you would expect.
Wow.
So again, he was doing something for the Soviet military while serving as a top diplomat in Greece, which was at that point at least more or less a neutral country.
Fascinating. And you've got the exact document.
You have the actual document.
That's amazing.
And generally, it's very unusual to see anything of this level. Most of the children of Soviet elite were so well taken care of that even their descendants after they died. And Andropov actually happened. Igor Andropov, the son of Yuri Andropov, died fairly young. I think he was just under 65 when he died. He was not in good health. Apparently had some issues. And the whole family story of Andropov is not a happy one at all. This fellow, by the way, he was born in the, I believe in the early 60s. So, no, actually even before that. He was in the 60s with Andropov. He was serving, and in the 50s, he was serving in Hungary. His dad was serving in Hungary with the Soviet embassy, and during this time, young Andropov was a small child, and that's when Hungarian Revolution happened. When they were literally hanging state officers, state security officers of Hungary, communist leaders on the lampposts, right in front of the embassy.
Wow.
So young Andropov lived through that, and that apparently affected him very deeply. Andropov's wife became a drug addict at that point. So this whole family story is not a happy one at all.
Oh, okay.
But the point is, yes, he became eventually an ambassador to Greece, and lo and behold, we have his documents here.
Yes. Absolutely fascinating.
So that's your story for today of Soviet Combat Cooperation. I hope you find it interesting.
Oh, superb. And this is for sale on your website, obviously.
Not on the website, but yes, it's going to be for sale.
Oh, it's going to
be.
Website yet. Will be posted.
Yes, we'll be posted.
Okay, very good.
As far as prices for the medals, just very briefly, they haven't really changed all that much in very recent years. But I
Okay.
remember times when they were anywhere, in $100, $150 range.
Mm.
In recent years, currently we have one for sale. That's the one I just showed you, the
Yeah.
standard version, for 475. We sold one in 1920, in early part of this year, for 440.
Mhm.
There was one in 2020 on our website for 395 and got sold. In August of 2018, this is just a sampling of what we had,
Mhm.
280. In 2014, you'll notice the price was a little bit higher, 325, and that's because prices actually got depressed
Mm.
in the years following 2008,
Mm.
in part because of economic troubles and also around the world, and also because of Russian involvement in all kinds of military conflicts and initiating those conflicts. Of course, Russian economy suffered badly,
Wow.
at least for the common people, as far as buying power.
And you
So that
have,
depressed
yeah,
prices.
you have only came across a few pieces
Oh yeah, they don't come
in the
along
past
very
decade.
often. Yeah, not
Right.
very often. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm not talking huge rarity. That's
No,
not
no. But
once in 5 years.
Mhm.
It's much more frequent than that.
Right.
But it's a scarce metal.
Yeah.
And
You,
again, to
yeah.
put the number of issues into perspective,
Mhm.
20,000 issues, we're talking about 11,000, 12,000 issues
Mm.
of the title of Hero of Soviet Union. Okay, if you
Mhm.
subtract posthumous, maybe 8,000, 9,000
Yes.
Hero Stars, over 9,000
Right.
in existence.
Mhm.
And here we have 20,000. So it's somewhat comparable. It's
Yes.
on
Yes.
the same order of magnitude
Right.
as the Hero Stars.
Wow.
Of course, much less important, but still a very interesting Cold War medal.
Yes.
Now, the documents are much more scarce than the medal itself. And
Mm.
among the more interesting documents that we had in recent years,
Mhm.
or I should say ever, was the one issued to Kozyudup, the top Soviet fighter ace of World War II.
Wow.
He received medal as well. Probably not as much in recognition of his active cooperation with other militaries, although he was always a politically important person, and of course dealt a lot with foreign delegations, but possibly just in recognition of his past role. But he was issued one of these medals with a document, and I was lucky enough to get the document.
Mm.
That one sold for $1,100, just as a comparison. But that was back in 2007.
Oh, okay. Okay. Scarce piece.
Very, again, very rarely you see something to a very important and interesting person.
Mm. Fantastic. Wow. All right. Well, thank you very much, Igor. That was, I mean, to the casual observer, these metals, we cannot say they look rare.
No,
No.
it's more than meets the eye.
More than meets the eye. Yep. Yep. Wow. Absolutely shocking.